Collins Andrews. I'm the current president of the Arkansas Academy of Computing. And today I have the pleasure of introducing George Knight, who is one of the founders of this academy. George was born in Hot Springs. He was raised in Nashville and Little Rock, and he's a graduate of the University of Arkansas in civil engineering. After he served in the Army as a pilot, he worked for a short time as a civil engineer and then joined IBM in Little Rock in 1967. And after 2 years, he had the opportunity to move to Fayetteville, and he was a marketing representative for IBM, selling to companies with selling large systems to companies. And you can already kind of see where this is going to go. In 1970, and as George says, with a lot of help from other people, he installed the first computer in Walmart. And at that time, Walmart had 14 stores, and Walmart was George's account for 17 years. He eventually became an IBM manager, working in both St. Louis and in Little Rock, and he retired in 1993. Since then, he's been very active as a consultant for IBM and also for Axiom. And George Knight is another Arkansas computing industry legend. Now, he won't say that, but he is. And not only has he been active and visible in Arkansas, the Arkansas computing industry through IBM, working with co-workers and customers, he's been an important player in the recruiting of computing industry professionals for over 40 years, through Axiom as well as IBM. And probably as well as anyone in the state, George knows what to look for and identify as far as future success in the computing industry. So George, let's get started.
All right.
And we'll start with, let's go before computing. And tell a little bit about yourself, about where you were raised and your parents and their education and jobs. Just what was your family like and the influence it had on you?
Well, Collins, my family was in Arkansas from both sides of the family prior to the Civil War. So been there for many, many years. It's interesting, my father was the first in his family to get a college degree. He got a degree in agriculture at the University of Arkansas. My mother was the first in her family from Northeast Arkansas. She was the first to get a degree and got a degree as a home economics teacher. I was raised, my early years really were in Nashville, Arkansas in the southwest corner. In the 8th grade, moved to Little Rock, shock of my life. I still don't appreciate my parents for doing this to me, but they took me to Westside Junior High School, which is notorious in Little Rock, and then I graduated from Little Rock Central in 1958 at the integration crisis year. There was never any doubt in my mind or in my parents' mind that I was going to go to the University of Arkansas and I was going to get a degree. That was going to happen. I had an uncle who was a civil engineer, and that was the influence that led me into civil engineering. Truthfully, I arrived at the university and I loved it. May have been a fraternity life. All of a sudden there were girls, there were a lot of things to do. I was away from home, and I enjoyed the university. I loved every minute of the university. Didn't do that well in civil engineering, but did graduate. And learned to fly as in ROTC, and went into the Army after the university as an Army pilot. Came out of the service as a captain, flew for the National Guard for quite a while. And I love that. Probably would have stayed with it had it not been Vietnam. I had a family and felt like it was time to move on. I guess from there, I was going to be a civil engineer. I was like many people I run in today. I was going to have my own company, and I was going to have my own company in a hurry. I joined a very, very small consulting firm in Little Rock with the idea that within a couple of years I'd be a partner.
What was the job market like back then when you were looking for a job? In your case, I guess it was out of the Army.
In the Army, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting, Collins. I think I put out 62 resumes, and if I remember correctly, I got 60 responses. I mean, the job market was wonderful, and I really took one of the lower paying jobs, if not the lowest paying jobs, because of where I wanted to go. I see a lot of that in students today. You know, they all want to start their own companies, so they get excited about it. Well, I was doing the same thing they are. I wanted to have my own company in a short period of time. So I joined a small consulting firm with that in mind. Found out fairly quickly that it was not going to happen. There was family involved and other things. But it was great for me because now we'll talk about computing. There were no computers in the consulting business, in any of the consulting firms in Little Rock. And they had decided, some of them decided to get together and buy one computer and share it. And they were going to buy an 1130. Well, there are only 2 or 3 guys in the consulting firm I'm in, so I was assigned to go work with them and learn about the 1130 and see if we really should be doing this.
Had you had any exposure to computers before that?
Zero. Zip.
Perfect.
So you know, but I did learn some things. You know, I began to learn about it. I guess the next step in my computer life, we were playing bridge one night with Wally Anderson, who is in the academy, and Wally and I had been friends in college. We flew together in the service, and he was working for IBM, and he started telling me what a great company IBM was, how much he enjoyed it, and I was a little disillusioned with the consulting business, and he said, well, why don't you come talk to IBM? They called me at 8:30 the next morning. I went over, interviewed with Bob Oliver. And
who's another Academy member.
Yeah, who's another Academy member and is notorious as a recruiter in Arkansas and for IBM. But Bob looked at my grades, and then he really looked at about 3 things. He looked at my grades, they were not very good. Looked at my activities, I did have activities. But I took his aptitude test. That was the key for Bob Oliver. And I aced that aptitude test. And Bob, I'll never forget, came back to me and said, how many times have you taken this before? I said, Bob, I've never seen it. He said, I'm not sure he believes me today, but he offered me a job. I went to work before noon the same day. And
I guess that tells a little bit about what the job market in the computing business was like, or the need in the computing business was like back then.
That, you know, honestly, I think that was what was happening. Bob needed to hire some people before the end of the year. This was November, but no, they really were looking for people. And he saw me more as a technical person at that time, but already at that time I had seen in consulting, I'd seen salesmen come into that office selling, you know, water systems or sewer systems or whatever. And I said, boy, this looks like a better deal. I kind of like what these guys are doing.
Well, he probably saw you as a technical person because of that aptitude test.
Yeah, aptitude test, and because my background, you know, they were not just hiring engineers then, they were hiring, you know, many different disciplines. But engineering, I think most of the people they'd hired in engineering had become technical, become systems engineers initially. So, so I joined IBM in Little Rock, end of '67, I think it was, and was trained there. I joined the state team with another member of the academy, Tom Goldsboro, and worked with some people in the state that are also in the academy. I did that for 1 year, and they needed Jim Heffley, also in the academy, was left Fayetteville, and I took his place as the marketing rep in Fayetteville with Charles Morgan and Roger Klein, 2 other names that we know as my technical guys, and I was the salesman, and we were Fayetteville.
Well, talk a little bit about IBM's training. So you come to work for IBM and you don't know anything about computers, or you know little from working.
Less than nothing.
Okay, less than nothing, yeah, right, that's fair. And so what did IBM do to get you to the point where you could be a contributor in whatever way they wanted you to?
Their training program was outstanding. I went to the first 5 weeks of class in New Orleans. And at that time, we started out with punch cards, you know, and you did punch card training with accounting machines, and then went into computing. And so we spent 5 weeks, then spent 1 week out in California just learning about, you know, the basics of IBM, and then came back and spent another 6 weeks. Came home for 3 weeks, I think, and I went back to another 6 weeks of training. So training was excellent. I mean, outstanding. The people were outstanding. The facilities, everything about IBM. I'm a guy that I was going to be a consulting engineer and didn't know what a computer was, and all of a sudden I'm really get an opportunity to see where even in those days you could see where computing was going. In my mind, it was moving very, very, very fast, and. So I came back from that, did get some education in handling state government. Went, you travel, went to Washington, spent some time, but came back and joined that team. Really wasn't a team with Tom, and stayed there for a year before I went to Fayetteville. Fayetteville, I'll go ahead and talk a little about that.
Talk about you mentioned the word team a couple of times. What was IBM's use of teams of people? How did they work together, and how important was that?
You know, I won't compare it to today. I see so many people working at home, and I'm not sure companies are as loyal to their people today as they were at that time. In my mind, IBM was my whole career was unbelievable. I mean, they were so loyal to their employees, and at the same time, you looked around you and you saw people that were cooperating in every area. The technical, the guys that worked on the computers, that worked on the very, very dig into the code type folks, very, very technical. But we all worked together to make that office successful. Well, first to make ourselves successful, to make that office successful. It went on up to the next level to make that successful. We wanted IBM to win. And it was very important to me, but as far as I'm concerned, it was very important to everyone that was around me. You know, they were committed. We were committed to make this company work. And I'm not sure you see that so much today in some of the companies, but I'm not that close to it either.
I'm going to ask one other question about that. I'm going to guess that you had a good sense for what IBM was trying to accomplish as a company. Is that true or not true?
Had a very good sense. I'll say that some days I thought they were wrong, but I'll get into that a little bit as we keep talking. But they at all levels, people were committed. I'm going to say you go up to the staff level, you go up to the people that were doing development, which I spent a lot of time with those folks. It was, they were committed to make this work and make the customer successful. We were far more hardware oriented than you would see today. It seems that a lot of the industry is so software oriented and should be, but we were very hardware oriented, but you were going to make it work. I mean, no matter what it took, the number of hours or whatever.
Going up to Fayetteville then.
All right, I go to Fayetteville to handle the University of Arkansas, which I did. I mean, University of Arkansas had a computer they used for their administrative. They had one they used for their technical side or whatever, development, whatever. And I spent a lot of time with the administrative side, spent some time with technical. Loved the university, loved the people that I was working with. I'll tell one story. I arrive in Fayetteville, and I'm pretty proud of myself. I've been with IBM a couple of years.
How old were you?
Well, I was an old guy because I had been in the service flying for a while, so I was 27 probably. I go see one of my profs that had taught me one of the civil engineering courses, and he had taught the slide rule. I mean, in fact, my slide rule is here on campus somewhere. But I remember going to him and talking to him about computing, and about computing was really going to run a lot of what we did in civil engineering. we were going to, where you talk about doing cut and fill applications, we can do that on a computer in no time. And I still remember today him looking at me and saying, George, if you ever think you're going to replace this, pulled out a slide rule, you're dreaming.
Yeah, right.
And I turned red and left the office, and that was the end of that. But now this was back in, gosh, it was 67, 68, maybe 69. So, you know, it was just, it was, things were moving rapidly, you know, and you'd catch a professor that was about to retire, and he was right. Probably during his career, they didn't quite change. But the businesses in Northwest Arkansas were booming. I'll talk about several different areas and then talk about one in particular. But I still remember I called on the Cooper Communities, land developer. Has Bella Vista is theirs here. They've got one in a couple in Hot Springs. I loved Cooper Communities. They had a little computer, small computer, and I go in. We start talking about making money for Cooper, and one day we were in a discussion, and they were talking about letter writing, and I don't, as far as I know, nobody had ever done letter writing on a computer. And these guys, they were getting names from, they'd go to every rodeo, county fair, you name it, and pick up names, and said, you know, if we could write those all in a letter and do it, we're doing it already, but basically manually, do it on a computer, that might be a big deal. And he said, George, how do you do it? And they'll still kid me about this. They were writing an RPG. I said, I'm sure you can just put a link there to an RPG program somewhere and make this thing go. Well, it was a little more difficult than that. But before long, they were writing letters, and they'd send out 100 letters. 4 people would visit the property, and 2 of them would buy. And they would look at that and said, more letters we can write, the richer we're going to be. But you know, that's how far back we were. I mean, we were just leaving accounting machines. So it was, that was big. I mean, it was huge. You look at their developments, a lot of that was done strictly by just letter writing. We had poultry industry up here. Someone that preceded me had worked on the poultry information system, and this was really growing poultry. I mean, they were just getting to the point where they were trying to feed formulation. Let's feed the chickens the right things to grow them out as fast as we can. There were a lot of things going in the poultry, growth of poultry at that time that was brand new. I mean, this was all new. Let's do it on a computer. Let's figure out what we ought to be doing, how we're going to be doing it. And so that was exciting. I remember IBM did put out a little magazine. They put out an article on Simmons over in Siloam Springs on how they were doing business. And so that was happening. Trucking, for some reason, I think it was because we're the central part of the United States, became big industry up here. You still is. But you know, you had the Hunts and other truck lines that were around here.
So who would decide what computers were used for these given businesses? Who would figure that out? Who would figure out that there's a need, and who would figure out that there's a solution? How did that get done back then?
You know, to me, there was just a tremendous amount of cooperation between customer and IBM. I'm just going to say IBM because although there was some good, solid competition up here from NCR with another one of our members, Charlie McMurtry, and the UNIVAC was up here. But by and large, my customers were, the ones I worked with were really IBM, and we would work together on solutions. And it was the customer, but IBM tried to respond. I'll put it that way. I think of mass merchandisers. They did all of the health and beauty aids products for many stores, and still a similar company does it today, making sure that health and beauty aids are stocked on the shelves. And gosh, the work that went into trying to work on their delivery systems. Called another name of Charles Morgan was the technical guy on that. and they really worked together. He woke up every morning wanting to get over there and get started trying to help them. Just happened to think the utility companies that we have around here, the co-ops, IBM developed, not me, but the technical guys that were working with me and girl, they developed the software to handle the electric co-ops, and most of this was a billing and that part of it. But it was amazing because all that was new. I mean, it might have had some card equipment, but very little of it. So that was new. And now I'll go into the one that was my life for many, many years. Walmart did not have a computer. And there was one on order when I came up here. Jim Heffley had the order. And about 4 months after I arrived, it installed. Interesting story, I always said that there were 18 stores when it installed. And Mr. Walton always said there were 14 stores. And I'm not sure Mr. Walton ever really knew what my name was. No, I did spend a lot of time with him, but he was so intense. But he would say, anytime we'd talk about it, he'd say there were 14 stores. And I'd say, there were 18. And I talked to someone recently that was involved at that time. In fact, it was a sporting goods buyer at that time. And he said, George, he said, you're probably both right. He said, from the time y'all started installing that computer until the time you finished, it went from 14 to 18. And I'm sure it did, because they were growing. Walmart was already, it was already obvious. I mean, they were going to be a factor.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we put in a Model 20, and things, now I'm not going to just say Walmart, because there was something going on all these accounts. You were bouncing from one to another. But I'm not sure IBM ever caught up to Walmart. In the early 70s, we had a planning session, a 5-day planning session with Mr. Walton and his top executives. And we met at least a half a day for those 5 days. And that plan was executed for years to follow. The distribution centers and the way they were going to be a leader in distribution, and how they, at that time, wanted a computer in every distribution center. And let's stay ahead of the curve. Let's understand what our stores need. I remember in that same session, we're talking about the stores, and there was nothing in the stores. And a leader at Walmart, Jack Shoemaker, came by and patted me on the shoulder and says, George, if you get me an intelligent terminal in the stores, you'll be a very wealthy man. And we did. I worked with IBM, tried, and we put something called a 3774 in there that was more intelligence than it had. And it did the personnel side. We did reporting on sales for replenishment. Just the basic applications, but they didn't have that prior to this. And so, just to be able to communicate back with the home office. And
did other retailers have that capability, or was Walmart a leader in that?
Well, I'm going to tell you how leader they were.
Okay.
Now that you brought it up, it just reminded me of a story. We go to Raleigh, North Carolina, where we made terminals, made our stuff. And before we went, they were going to put together a presentation for us. And we arrive in Raleigh, and it was a flip chart, and the first flip chart was Walmart, Wallmart. I mean, they misspelled the name, but so they didn't really know Walmart. The second thing is they did not believe in any way that Walmart would ever do anything like this. The only company that had multiple terminals to that, talking about a lot of terminals and them being intelligent, was Holiday Inn. And Holiday Inn was the leader, obviously. I may be wrong, but I think even Holiday Inn may have had 400 terminals at that time, 400 motel terminals. But, we're starting out, we didn't have 400, but we were probably coming up on 100 or something in that range. So, but I'm not sure Raleigh, which is our development site, really believed that Walmart was going to do this. Walmart did it, and we did it fast. And stayed with 37, with that that particular terminal for years until a Series 1 came out and started putting it in, and then the industry was changing so fast at that point. But yeah, that was early Walmart. I mean, that was, you know, the early days when it was really getting started, and computing was getting started at the same time in retail.
How was IBM organized to serve Walmart?
Not,
What was the who all was involved, and not so much by name, but how many people, and what were their roles, and what dedication did they have, and so forth?
Answer is not very well, and not very well. There was a friend of mine, Phil Carter, was on staff in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And I got Phil up here to help me do some planning session, but to try to say that we had an industry support, there was not any, you know, later on,
Yeah.
tremendous interest. It was great for me because Collins, I was on quota, and IBM never caught up with me on that quota. So I did very, very well for many years. But
They probably changed the rules later because of people like you. I
they
would
kept
guess.
changing the rules, yeah. But now this is pre-point of sale. This is pre-everything. In fact, I can still remember, and I'll go ahead and go into that, when we started talking point of sale. I mean, just the thought of putting a terminal at every location where you're checking out. I mean, come on now. This is going to be tough. And at the same time, there was no SKU. You know, we have SKU on everything now. And I still remember IBM was saying, no, SKU is not going to be the answer. It's going to be magnetics. They were designing a little magnet. In fact, they used it at Dillard's. That was probably their first. And they were pushing magnetics. And I still remember someone talking to me, and I don't know, it was either in Boca Raton or in Raleigh, kind of bouncing back and forth, but brought out certs and brought out a little cert deal and said, now, do you ever think that they'll be able to put an SKU on that product? And at that time, SKUs were pretty good size. But, you know, it was unbelievable to even think that you were ever going to be able to make that go. And then the idea of scanning, we finally, in fact, NCR beat us in some of the first few stores, and we finally put our first store in Corpus Christi. And I still remember being down there, and when you went to a store opening, this was the first IBM point of sale store opening. When you went to a store opening, Shoemaker and Mr. Walton, they made you carry a broom around or stay out and park cars. But if you were a vendor, you didn't stand around there and be a vendor. You had to do something. And I'm standing there with a broom, and we have worked and worked and worked to get that store ready to go. And Walmart changed added a lot of SKUs toward the end and added a lot of more product. And disk drives were slow. You know that. I mean, they were very slow. And I remember the first checkout, I'm standing there and someone comes by with like a liter Coke and drag it across that scanner. Nothing. 60 seconds later, it finally reads something. And I still remember Shoemaker taking me aside and saying, I can't repeat what he said, but yeah.
You're going to fix this.
But we left in a hurry. The point of sale rep and I were out of there. But by that point, yes, there were, I'm back up to a question you had. There were industry specialists, you know, and we had a lot of industry help at that time from people who were really trying, you know, saw the future and were trying to make all of this happen. And I became a manager somewhere in that time and was a manager of technical and the sales side for many years. And I'd hate to guess how many people we had fly in here, and some of them stayed week after week after week. And in fact, I had one that worked with me. Well, I had two different ones that worked with me in different areas that lived in other cities and probably spent 48 weeks a year here.
Thinking back on IBM back then and the way you worked with them, what would you say to the question of what did IBM think of their customers, and what did they do with you guys to have you behave in a certain way with customers? Were they any different from any other company? I guess is the way I want to ask the question, because I mean I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer either. And I almost have to say it depends on the customer. Because, we really, maybe it may have to do with how much business they did with us also. But I can think of banks in Arkansas. I can think of many businesses in Arkansas where we were so dedicated to those customers. I mean, dedicated to them for years and years with good, solid people and good, solid support. Think of some industries where I thought we really struggled, and it may have been, but IBM was committed. I mean, IBM really was committed. I think and when I say IBM, it's nothing but the people. I mean, the people were, IBM struggled on how to set up industry support. Some of that was, now I was in that's another thing. I spent my entire career in the field, so I never was on staff, and so I can say anything I want to about staff, but sometimes I think staff may not have understood what we were trying to do or what the customer was trying to do, but they tried, really did, and the company was dedicated.
Anything else you want to say? I'm going to shift the conversation over to some issues related to your involvement with other people in computing and the community and so forth. But anything else you want to say about working for IBM, or why'd you retire?
That's a good question also. When I started with IBM, I always thought, boy, a 55-year-old guy is really old in IBM. And it's just a fact of the business. And I was coming up on 30 years with the company. And probably shouldn't say this, but I really do think IBM was trying at that time to move some people. In other words, I was a manager and trying to kind of talk some people out of the business, maybe. Probably shouldn't say that, but it's true. And I started looking at it myself, and I said, good gracious, man, what they're doing, they were letting you bridge and paying you so much if and I had the one that finally sold me is I had a half year's vacation. I had 8 weeks a year in vacation. You couldn't take 8 weeks. I couldn't take 4 weeks. And so then they said, well, you got to take your 8 weeks plus you got to take 2 extra. And about that time, so you can cut down on this half year that we're going to pay you when you leave. And I looked at that, and I looked at what they'd pay you to bridge, and I had a party at my house one night, and I just announced that I was going to go do other things, and never regretted it. I'd been with IBM 28 and a half years. They bridged me to 30, and so and gave me what I considered quite a bit of money. So I said, it's time. Why don't I just go do some other things? And it's kind of interesting because I left IBM and went right back to work for them, as and I was working for a sales team, doing some installation stuff. But I worked for them for quite a while, and then I guess I started working for Axiom. They call me a consultant, but I did several things for Axiom. I helped with the racing team, worked hard with their team that really was Charles Morgan's team. I worked in recruiting with Axiom for years and years, and believe me, my knowledge of recruiting, Bob Oliver taught me everything I know. And his idea was to get to know the profs, to get to know the students before they're seniors, to understand which ones are coming along that you really want to hire. And you get a lot of that from just talking to profs and understanding them and being with them. And he did that, and I enjoy people, so I really enjoyed doing that, and have been doing that until recently. But I also worked for some other companies, small companies, and did some things, and have thoroughly enjoyed my last almost 20 years of retirement.
Well, you've been in the computing business really in Arkansas. Almost most of your career has actually been in Arkansas. So you know a lot of people,
That's
and you
correct.
know a lot of people around here. Who were, if you were to name 2 or 3 people that you worked with that you think really had an impact on this industry, on this discipline in the state of Arkansas, who would those be?
Oh, me, I wish you'd asked me that earlier and let me think about it a few minutes. Well, you know some of them. I mean, and I can go back to the Walter Smileys.
Yeah,
Walter,
you've actually mentioned some people, of course, in this interview.
Well, you go back to Walter Smileys, it started Systematics, or the Morgans that started, and Kleins that started Axiom, and Alex Dietz's, and you know, I look at Wally Anderson. I've mentioned him 2 or 3 times. Wally retired the same time I did, but he took over IT at Walmart at that time, and then went down to Axiom and handled IT down there. Wally is, and he's now, I guess, in a startup, what I'd call a startup.
He is.
But people like that have been so involved in computing in the state of Arkansas from day one. You know, it's almost, you can look at it by industry. I mean, that's big database type industry, the last one I just mentioned, but you can look, gosh, I don't know, I look up at Walmart, and I think of the IBMers that have been involved in Walmart over the years, just the ones that did point of sale, the ones that knew distribution, the ones that knew, you know, pick a piece of that industry. But there's so many different industries in Arkansas. I just happen to think of banking, and I could name some in banking, but there are just so many of them.
There's a question that a lot of people who are young and moving into a career in business have and really struggle with, and that has to do with how do you balance your life between working and not working. And you know, all work can be intense. The computing work, I know myself, can be extremely intense. How did you manage that issue, and how well did you manage it between how much do you work, how much do you do something else, how much are you involved with your family, and did you struggle with that, and how did you manage it?
Yes, I struggle with that, and I'm in deep trouble right now because I have not mentioned that this is, I don't think I have, this is my 50th anniversary.
You haven't, but you should.
It is my 50th anniversary, and I have 2 children. They have done outstanding. My daughter is here, and my son's in San Francisco, and I have one grandchild and a couple of step-grandchildren who are all doing very, very well. To answer your question, I'm not very good at answering this. I'm lucky to have been married 50 years. No, she put up with me, and you know, in fact, I think about my children. They're running in different, husband and wife are running in different directions, and it bothers me. But boy, during a lot of that time, I worked long hours, many, you know, out of town at one time every other week, was gone somewhere, and you don't realize until, I guess, until your children are walking out the door that, boy, I wish I'd spent more time, you know, with them. Now today, when I retired, I think I was beginning to really understand it. And I left Fayetteville when I stayed in Fayetteville until my kids graduated from high school. So we did stay here and kept them in a great school system. And it was a conscious decision. I had opportunities to move, but I stayed here until '87, until my son got out of high school. And then we decided to bounce around a little bit and went to St. Louis, next Little Rock. But anyway, that decision, I mean, everyone has to make that decision one way or other. I enjoyed being here in Fayetteville. I was involved with the Boys Club. I was involved with Parks and Recreation. I did get to, as someone said the other day, I did normally get to come home and see them when they had activities. You know, you see so many people that miss that, but I made a conscious effort to try to be there when things happen. But boy, I was not very good at it, but I tried.
If you were to try to talk about I guess the comparison, at least as you would observe it, between the computing industry today and the computing industry when you were coming up in it, what would you say would be most significant? What's different? And for that matter, what's the same?
You know, I was in a discussion the other day with someone, and it's along these lines. It's tough to even define right this minute what the computing industry is. You know, I carry a Samsung phone, it's a computer. Got an iPad, it's a computer. Kindle, it's a computer. What's a laptop? You know, now we're getting to where the laptop is this big or a laptop is this big. You know, it's all changing so fast. And then you start saying, well, you know, what's a database? I mean, a database in Axiom's terminology is different from a database in one of the disciplines over here that has nothing to do with computing. Oh, well, the library. The library is amazing to me on what they're doing, how fast they're moving. If you look at archaeology or look at, that's what it was something in archaeology. You need a DP expert or IT, I don't know what the terminology is anymore, expert in archaeology. So where does computing begin and where does it end anymore? I mean, it can go to the phone or to the watch that you have on. I mean, I've been wearing an UP, if you know what an UP is, but it'll take care of when you're asleep, when you're awake. It's a little computer. And I'm sitting there saying, this is crazy, you know, where we're headed and to see where we're going. You and I had a discussion earlier today, and that's one that just fascinates me is, it seems that every kid that's coming out of school right now wants to be an entrepreneur. And, you know, everyone that's coming out in computing wants to be an entrepreneur. I think maybe we did back when we were coming out of school. We just didn't quite know how to vocalize it and say, by gosh, I'm going to do it. It may be doing games, and it may be trying to figure out how to make this thing work on your wrist. But where does computing begin? Where does it end right now? And that's an interesting question. It really is.
If you were to give some kind of summary of what now you would say to young people about how they ought to focus their life or what they ought to do, particularly those who have expressed some interest in these computing disciplines, what are some of the things that you tell young people? Because I know you talk to them.
Yeah, I talk to them, but I'm not sure. Honestly, another conversation I've had in the last couple of days, it depends on the person. This one was one that is looking at a job that they're going to be traveling, flying out on Sunday afternoon, coming back in on Friday for no telling how long, Thursday night actually. I'm saying, you know, you just don't understand how tough that life is. But if that's what you want to do, and that's where you want to, you know, that's the job you want to take and where you want to go for it. I mean, you can change your mind a few years down the road, but the thing that concerns me more is don't go where you don't really want to go. You know, a lot of people, a lot of them maybe want to do archaeology or maybe want to do museum. I guess get the computer education and go do that. I mean, go be involved and do, but I'm a true believer that anyone over here at the University of Arkansas or here in this high school needs to get and we've come up with our new terminology, STEM education, but they need to get as much STEM education or education in computing disciplines they can possibly get, no matter what their degree is. I mean, I think it's going to help them along the way.
I guess I'm kind of thinking about your career, and I guess you probably learned the value of integrating technical knowledge along with general knowledge and an ability to communicate and so forth, that there's more to being in this industry than knowing just the pure technical part of it.
I heard this week, and I get excited about it. If you're getting a degree over here in computer science, computer engineering, you have to take a communications course. I still remember shortly after I came back up here with IBM, I went back over to the engineering school and said, boy, I'd like to talk to if not your classes, let me talk to the computing club or whatever, or the engineering, this was before computing, and talk about sales. Because, I mean, did anybody ever mention sales to you in engineering?
Absolutely not. They were enemies if they were mentioned.
Yeah, and I got out of school and I figured out, gosh almighty, this is fun. You know, I can go out and talk about somebody else has to implement it, but I can go out and talk about, applications and visit with these people and talk. You begin to talk to the root of their business. And to me, that's exciting. Now, other people, I've worked with a lot of other people that what they want to know is how to do that, how to develop it, how to go back to Wally. In his mind, he is already figuring out how they're going to do it and put it all together. So I think there's such a broad range here that it's just that we need people to I'll go back to STEM. I really believe that type of education, anything that you can get in engineering or, and we're specifically talking about computing, get as much as you can and use it in the industry and the way you want to use it. I don't care if you're banking, because banking, a heck of a lot of that's computing. And if no matter what part of it you're going to be. That may not answer your question. Actually, that leaves it wide open, but it's just saying, do what you want to do. Find your place in life.
I think we've learned by having the opportunity to meet so many people in this academy and now learn a little bit about their careers in depth. This issue of knowing a technical subject, but almost all work today in some form or another requires a little bit of a base knowledge technically,
Sure
and
does.
you can pretty much do anything. And you and some of these other people we've had the opportunity to talk to, I think, reflect that story very well. Anything else we need to say, George?
Not really, except I look at my career, it may even call it boring, but it has been a wonderful run to watch computing go from where we saw it. Collins isn't as old as I am. From where I saw it initially to where it is today is just fascinating to me. It's absolutely fascinating. Taking that phone out of my pocket, it's interesting to me that they can do everything they can do with that, and see what it was back when we had the old punch card days and where it's what's happened. It's been an exciting time. I'm sure the group that's, the age I was when I got into it, that's that age today and looks at it 50 years from now or whatever, they're going to say, they're going to be shaking their head also.
And I'm sure you look at it today and think there is no telling what it's going to be in the future, and the excitement, it can still be there.
Well, the excitement's there. And you see it in all these entrepreneurial kids that are coming out right now, because they're sitting there, boy, the wheels are turning, and they're saying, I could do, I can start a company and I can do something. Well, some of them are going to do it. They're going to do it big time. I will mention one other thing. I work with a group called the Osher Lifelong Learning, and it's people 50 and over classes, continue learning. And it's fascinating to me how many of them are still learning computing. They're going to iPad classes. They're going to, you name it, they're going to those classes because it's still exciting to the older group. I'll put it, I'm one of those. But it's just an exciting business. Computing is interesting, it's exciting, I think.
Terrific. Well, that's a very thorough look at the career of another one of our outstanding pioneers, and we do appreciate you spending this much time, George, and hopefully we can learn some more about some other folks. Thanks.
Appreciate you.
Okay.
Thank you.